Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So I'm breaking down the Monday Night Football Showdown slate for tonight on Draftkings. We have an AFC showdown between the Buffalo Bills and the New England Patriots, which should be at least a decent game because we get to watch Josh Allen and Stefon Diggs. Outside of that, probably not the best game in the world. But if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. And while you're at it, you might as well hit that notification bell as well so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. YouTube tells me around 50% of the people who watch these videos have not yet subscribed. So if you're a frequent visitor to the channel, or if you just new like what you see, consider that subscribe button because it really helps the channel grow. It's obviously going to help me out as well. And if you don't follow me over on social media, the handle is in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And if you help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that. If you want access to all the sheets, I'll be doing this stuff throughout the playoffs. I also do NBA stuff as well, including MLB and NASCAR when those seasons start up too. But without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. And up top, we have Josh Allen at $12,600. It's a massive price tag, but hey, he's been one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy football this season. And since it's a showdown slate, yeah, we 100% have to have interest here. I think at the very least, he should be in your flex spot with definite consideration for your captain spot. He has just been that good this season. He's going to make a monster game last week versus the Broncos on that Saturday slate where he had around 40 Draftkings points. Just absolutely blitzed them. Now, it was a softer matchup versus the Broncos. They are missing pretty much their entire secondary, and the Patriots have not been that forgiving to fantasy quarterbacks this season. If you're looking at their overall numbers, please scroll over there. They are giving up the third fewest points rated in the quarterback position, despite being 16th versus the pass. But keep in mind, they are going to be without Stefon Gilmore in this game, which is definitely going to soften up that secondary. Still an overall decent defense versus the pass, but I still think Josh Allen can come through here, and he's just been having a fantastic season. Nearly 300 passing yards per game, over 2 passing touchdowns from the ball, nearly 40 times per game with a near 70% completion percentage. Also offers you that rushing upside as well, which is always going to boost his floor and give him a decently high ceiling as well. On the season, over half a rushing touchdown per game, about 5 carries, and nearly 30 rushing yards. Those numbers are not that bad for a quarterback, but they do show up right here just because Cam Newton does run the ball a bit more than Josh Allen, so it's kind of bad comparison for him just to make his rushing numbers look good, but relative to other quarterbacks in the league, he is a pretty darn good rushing quarterback, just not quite up there with Cam Newton so far this season in some categories. But I know he's really expensive, but with the way this slate is, I think we have enough value to jam him in, and he's going to be the first guy I have consideration for my captain spot. If I can't get all the way up to him, I think that's fine. I think there's other good options, maybe like Stefon Diggs, who's a bit cheaper, and he's been having a phenomenal season, but I definitely love Josh Allen here, despite the overall tougher matchup versus the New England Patriots. And then moving down to Cam Newton, he comes in at a nice price tag of $9,000, which does make him an easier fit into our lineups, but the guy has been absolutely awful this season. Now, he does run the ball, like I mentioned earlier, so it does boost his floor a bit, but his passing numbers have been awful this season. Less than 185 passing yards per game and less than half a passing touchdown. Like, those numbers are insanely bad. Close to a pick per game, only throwing the ball 25 times per game. The only bright side with him is that he does run the ball close to double-digit rushing attempts per game, close to a rushing touchdown, about 40 rushing yards, which I guess does equal to a passing touchdown. But, man, he has been bad this season. Looking at his recent games, 12.2 points with 209 passing yards, and 5.4 points week 14 versus the Rams, 119 passing yards, and I mean, the guy is just, he's had some decent games, and if you look all the way back to week 8 versus Buffalo, he did score another 20 DraftKings points versus them, had less than 175 passing yards and no passing touchdowns, but he did run the ball 9 times, 54 yards, and got into the end zone, so there's always a floor for Cam Newton because of his rushing ability. If they get around the goal line, there's a good chance Cam is going to get it in there, but it's just been hard to trust him. If he's playing bad, I would not be surprised if he gets benched for the backup, so you gotta keep that in mind as well. But the matchup overall as a quarterback is good versus Buffalo. They're 24th versus quarterbacks, allowing 250 passing yards per game, and they're 15th versus the pass. So, I mean, the matchup's fine. He's only $9,000. On showdown slates, I typically like to get the quarterbacks in my lineup because they are pretty much the safest source of fantasy points because they have the ball in their hands every single play. So I would like to get both of these guys in, but Cam Newton really only in consideration for the flex spot for me because the upside has been very, very low for Cam Newton this season. All right, moving on to the running back position, and as usual in my recent videos, we're going to group these guys up as a backfield because I feel like it's a bit easier to break down. So since Damien Harris is the first guy that pops up, we'll go over the New England backfield first, then we'll move on to the Buffalo Bills. But starting up top, we have Damien Harris, then going down we have Sony Michel, James White, J.J. Taylor, then Jacob Johnson is the main fullback in this offense. So we'll start all the way up top with Damien Harris at $8,400, and I gotta be honest, I'm not loving him in this game. Plus, he's also questionable, so we're not even sure if he's going to play. But he should split snaps with Sony Michel as the main rushing back, and meanwhile, James White will be the main receiving back. And I just feel like he's a bit too expensive here at $9,000. Now, he's been fine when he's been on the field this season. He's at 5 yards per carry, close to 70 rushing yards per game and about 15 rushing attempts. Well, I guess a little bit below that at 13.7, but at least somewhat close to it. It's just I feel like the upside is quite limited here because he just is not involved in the passing game. Less than a target per game, a 2.7% target share, half a catch per game, and they're 7-point dogs here versus the Buffalo Bills. So I assume they'll be trailing in this one, and also quarterback Cam Newton will steal carries around the goal line and just steal carries in general. Plus, there's going to be 3 running backs involved, potentially 4 with J.J. Taylor. So don't love the situation for any of these running backs, maybe besides James White, just because he's going to catch the ball, which does give him a decent floor, and he's the cheapest of the big 3 running backs for the New England Patriots. But again, we'll have to keep our eyes peeled for the news on Damien Harris if he's going to be good to go. Because if he's good to go, it will muddy the waters if he happens to play. But as of right now, we have no idea. But it is a good matchup on the ground versus Buffalo. They haven't been that great versus the run this season. They're 20th versus running backs, and they're also 17th versus the run. Close to 100 rushing yards allowed per game and a rushing touchdown. So, I mean, the matchup's good, but again, he's questionable for this game. And even if he is active, I don't know. I don't really want to pay $9,000 for Damien Harris as a 7-point dog here. And then moving down to Sony Michel at $7,000. So last week without Damien Harris playing in that game, he did play on 42% of the snaps. And the last time these guys were both healthy, Michel played on 25% of the snaps and Damien Harris at 37% of the snaps. So even if Damien Harris does play, I mean, they're going to be splitting carries. So it's not like it's just going to be the pure Damien Harris show. So really, this is the backfield I'm kind of avoiding outside of maybe James White. But on the season, Sony Michel has not been that involved. About 7.5 carries per game, 40-some rushing yards. Has been at 5.7 yards per carry, which is not that bad. But again, he does not catch footballs. Less than a target per game, a 3.4% target share. I already went over the matchup. I just feel like they're both a bit too expensive. And if you really want to play a Patriots running back, I would go with James White here at $6,200 just because they're 7-point dogs here, so we could get quite a few dump offs for James White on the season. About 4 targets per game, 3.5 catches, and close to a 20% target share. And those numbers aren't great, but he is the main pass catching back in this offense. He typically plays on around 50% of the snaps, so he's going to be on the field, which does make him playable. I just really don't like any of these Patriots running backs. And then if Damien Harris happens to be inactive and J.J. Taylor happens to play, because he's also questionable for this game, he could see a few snaps here, but last week he did play on 9% of the snaps, which really just doesn't have much to offer here. You might get a carry or 2 or a touch or 2, but outside of that, the upside is limited, even though he's only $200. Then moving on to the Buffalo backfield, it's a bit easier to break down. That Patriots backfield is an absolute mess, but for the most part, we know it's Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. And we also had news that TJ Yeldon got put on the COVID list, so I'm hoping there's no close contacts here, but it's been quite a while, so I'm assuming they're going to be good to go. Just keep in mind that's always a possibility that maybe they get deemed a close contact, so just keep your fingers crossed for that not to happen. But anyway, Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, these guys pretty much play 50% of the snaps. I mean, it's a bit skewed each week, but it's pretty much an even split here, with Singletary being more of a factor in the passing game, and Zach Moss is mainly just a factor on the ground. But I think both these guys have value here. We'll start up top with Devin Singletary at $7,600. And in most projection systems, Singletary is figured out as the better point per dollar option over Zach Moss because they're similarly priced, and Singletary is more involved in the passing game. Comparing their numbers this season, he's at 46 rushing yards per game compared to Zach Moss at 40. A little bit more rushing attempts at 10 compared to 9 for Zach Moss. He's been scoring less touchdowns on the ground than Zach Moss, although it's not that much of a difference. But where he has the edge here is the passing game, over 3 targets per game, while Zach Moss is under 1.5. Close to a 10% target share compared to Moss's 4%. Now, the thing is, they are 7-point favorites here, so I could see them in the second half laying on Moss to end the game. And it's a really good matchup on the ground. New England has definitely struggled versus running backs this season. They're 21st in fantasy points allowed per game to running backs, and also 28th versus the run, allowing over 110 rushing yards per game, and also close to 5 catches per game to running backs as well. So I think both these guys are pretty darn good plays. If you're playing a bunch of lineups, if you're someone that plays 150 lineups, I would not mind just splitting my exposure between Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. I feel like Singletary is a bit of a safer play just because he should catch like 2 to 4 balls in this game, which does boost his floor a little bit. But either way, I think both these guys are fine plays, but I will give an edge to Singletary just because he does catch passes. But the way game script works out, if they're up like double-digit points in this game in the second half, I could see a heavy dosage of Zach Moss late in this game. And if he happens to find the end zone and gets like 60, 80 rushing yards, he could definitely pay off if Singletary doesn't happen to find the end zone. But I think that's really it I want to talk about for running backs, so there's not really anyone else on the Bills that we can talk about. So we'll move on to the wide receiver position. And similar to the running backs, we're going to group these guys up as a team and break it down like that. And we'll start with the Bills since they're the first ones that pop up. We have Stefon Diggs, Cole Beasley as the 2 top dogs here. Then we have Gabriel Davis, John Brown if he happens to play. Then Isaiah McKenzie, $800 to round out the relevant wide receivers on this team. Now, Stefon Diggs, he's priced like it, but he's the guy you want in your lineups. He's just been so darn good this season. The ceiling is very high, and the floor is very high as well. He's yet to have a game below double-digit points. He's had a couple of games around 10 points, but that's pretty darn good when that's been your absolute floor this season. So yeah, I like him quite a bit. Now, the matchup versus New England, I wouldn't say it's the greatest in the world. They're allowing the second fewest points per game to the wide receiver position, only 138 receiving yards, despite being mid-pack, 16th DVA versus the pass. But the big thing here is that Stefon Diggs, not Stefon Diggs, Stephon Gilmore, the other Stephon, is going to be out for this game, which is definitely a boost for the wide receiver unit for the Buffalo Bills, because he's a pretty darn good corner. So taking him out of the equation is definitely going to soften some things up. And the numbers for Diggs have been so elite this season in terms of just his opportunity. Over 10 targets per game, not over 8 catches, but around 8 catches, close to 100 receiving yards, about 30% target share, 70% weight opportunity share, and about 36% market share of the team's air yards. He's had double-digit targets in 4 of the past 5 games, which also can go for Cole Beasley as well. He's been heavily involved, but if you got the money for Diggs, I would definitely try to get him in your lineup. I think he's fine either in the captain spot, but at the very least, he should be in consideration for your flex spot, similar to Josh Allen, the two most expensive players on the slate, but it's probably a good idea to build around them. Then dropping down to Cole Beasley at $10,000. Not quite as good as Stefon Diggs, but he's definitely been involved in this offense. Like I just said a little bit ago, he's had double-digit targets in 4 of the past 5 games, similar to Stefon Diggs. Also has a couple of massive games mixed in there as well. Now, if John Brown happens to return in this game, it should hurt Cole Beasley's target numbers. So if he happens to be good to go, $10,000 for Cole Beasley might be a pass for me. But if John Brown continues to be out, I mean, I would not be surprised if Cole Beasley sees like 8 to 10 targets in this game. And if he finds the end zone, he'll probably be a pretty darn good play. And if you want to get crazy, you could always fade Diggs for Cole Beasley and hope Diggs doesn't get to the end zone. It's a big Cole Beasley game, although I wouldn't say that's advised because at $10,000, I will say I'm not loving that price point on Cole Beasley. He's probably going to be a tough fit in our lineups, especially for fitting in Josh Allen and Stefon Diggs. Once you get those guys in, we're definitely going to have to find a lot of value, and then throwing in a $10,000 Cole Beasley might not be the best idea. So I feel like he's more of a tournament play rather than a cash game play, but his involvement in the offense recently has been nice. We're just going to have to keep our eyes and ears peeled for news on John Brown. Then Gabriel Davis at $5,000. So if John Brown happens to be out, we should expect him to continue playing around 90% of the snaps, which is something he's been doing pretty much the past 2 weeks, 83% in week 14 and 93% in week 15. So he's pretty much playing the majority of the snaps in this offense, so he certainly has a role here. On the season, though, just a bit less than 4 targets per game. He has been scoring plenty of touchdowns, though, nearly half a receiving touchdown per game. That's cooped with a 10% target share. But yeah, keep in mind, most of his damage is done when John Brown is not playing, because on the season, John Brown's at a close to a 20% target share, a 25% market share of the team's air yards, and an ADOT of 12, which is only behind Gabriel Davis. So if John Brown happens to be in, that's really going to hurt Gabriel Davis. But if John Brown happens to play, I mean, he's a phenomenal play at $2,800, assuming he gets pretty much a full-time role in the offense and he's fully good to go. But on the season, like I just said, his numbers, they're not that bad, over 5 targets per game and close to 50 receiving yards. But the past 2 games that he actually played that was healthy, he had target numbers of 11 and 8 in that game. So if he's good to go, $2,800, he could be one of the better value plays on the entire slate to pair with Josh Allen. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for the news, because that could be a really nice play if he happens to be good to go. And then Isaiah McKenzie, $800. If John Brown continues to be out, that would be a boost for him. Looking at the snaps for him recently, week 14 he played on 13% of the snaps, and then week 15 he played on 30% of the snaps. Could get a handful of targets, so at only $800, I think he would actually be a pretty decent value play to pair up with Josh Allen. Then moving on to the Patriots wide receivers, it's definitely not as exciting as the Bills, but we have Jacoby Myers, Damiere Byrd, N'Keal Harry, Julian Edelman. If he happens to return, I feel like it's a very, very slim chance of him returning, but the window is open for him to play, but I don't think he's going to. And then below that, we have Dante Moncrief and Gunnar Olszewski, if I'm saying that name right, but not the most exciting wide receiver unit in the world. Now, if we want to look at the snaps last week for these guys, Damiere Byrd, Jacoby Myers both had 96% of the snaps, and N'Keal Harry at 65%. Then Olszewski saw 2%, and Moncrief did not play. So we'll start up top with the wide receiver 1, with Jacoby Myers. Came off a game where he had 10 targets, had over 100 receiving yards, an overall decent day in a tough matchup versus Miami. And if you feel the need to play a Patriots wide receiver, he is definitely the guy I want, because the other guys are just really, really hard to trust. And Jacoby Myers, I mean, I wouldn't say he's the best wide receiver in the world, but he's definitely the source for fantasy points in the passing game here, about a 22% target share, which does lead the wide receiver group, 57% weight opportunity share, and also nearly 35% market share of the team's air yards. And also his advanced numbers are much higher than the rest of these guys at 0.24 targets per route ran, 0.42 fantasy points per route ran, and 2.32 yards per route ran. If you compare those to the other guys here, you're going to see shares of orange and red. So Jacoby Myers is definitely the preferred guy, but he is priced like it. But he should avoid Tre'Davious White in the slot for a good deal, because on the season, Jacoby Myers has played 59% of his snaps in the slot. Meanwhile, Tre'Davious White only 2% of his snaps in the slot. So if he can't avoid him for a decent portion of this game, I think Jacoby Myers is definitely the way to go here. And they're also 7-point dogs, so they're going to be able to throw in the ball late in the game, and I know the matchup isn't great as a wide receiver versus the Bills. They're allowing the 9th fewest points per game to the position. They're 15th DVA versus the pass. But the rest of these guys, I just really don't have much interest outside of Jacoby Myers. Like Damiere Byrd, he'll be on the field, but the targets are pretty low for him. Same with N'Keal Harry. I don't think Julian Edelman will play in this game. And then you really can't trust Gunnar Olszewski and Dante Moncrief out there. If Moncrief happens to play, he is questionable. So I think it's kind of Jacoby Myers or bust for me for the wide receiver group for the Patriots. So moving on to the tight end position, it gets even uglier here as all these tight ends are not that great. I think Dawson Knox is obviously the preferred option here, because outside of that, we're talking about guys like Dalton Keene, Tyler Kroft, Devin, not sure how to say your last name, Izzo's on IR, Lee Smith, and Reggie Gilliam was on the field last week. So yeah, a bit of a gross situation here. It's kind of Dawson Knox or bust for me. Yeah, maybe Keene gets a target or two, and maybe somehow he finds the end zone. He'll pay off his $1,400 price tag, but the volume is just so low. I don't really want to go with any of these guys. I'd rather play a cheap wide receiver or even a running back over some of these tight ends here. So Dawson Knox, $5,600. He's not super involved in the Bills offense, but he did have a touchdown last week. I think he had 4 targets, had 7 targets the week before that. And he's got Josh Allen throwing the football, so I mean, obviously there's more upside here. Still less than 3.5 targets per game, less than half a receiving touchdown, about an 8% target share. The numbers aren't that great, but if he happens to get into the end zone, he'll be a decent play, but I don't think he's going to absolutely smash that price tag of $5,600. And if you're looking at the matchup as a tight end versus the Patriots, it is pretty tough. They're allowing the 3rd fewest points per game to the position, despite being 16th DVA versus the pass, and he also has a massive disadvantage here versus Kyle Duggar, the safety, according to PFF. So not loving any of the tight ends here, but if you need like a cheap touchdown in one of these just absolute scrubs, it could happen, but it's probably not likely. So moving on to the defenses, we have the Bills and the Patriots here. Now, obviously, the Bills would be the preferred option here, but the defense has not been that great this season, but they have less than a 20-point implied team total against them, and they're 7-point favorites, and Cam Newton has been absolutely awful this season. I'm not that scared of their offense whatsoever, so I think the Bills are totally in play. It's just the upside's always limited for defenses because outside of a defensive touchdown, they don't typically absolutely smash their price points. In the Patriots defense, I'm not playing a defense versus Josh Allen and company, so you can kind of just cross them off the list for me unless something crazy happens. But if something crazy happens, it was probably unlikely, so I don't think it's optimal play. And then last but not least, we have our kickers, which I guess are somewhat decent value plays here. Up top, we have Tyler Bass. And then down below, we have Nick Folk, who's still dealing with the injury, but he should be good to go for this game. But kickers, they are what they are. If they hit their field goals, they hit their field goals and they become decent value plays. And I could see this maybe being somewhat of an ugly game. So I could see some decent amount of field goals for Tyler Bass and Nick Folk. But if I had to pick one, I'm obviously going to go with Bass. He's only $200 more than Folk, and they have a much higher implied team total, 7 points higher. So there should be more scoring opportunities for the Bills kicker rather than the Patriots. And I think that's going to be it for the video, guys. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. You know, follow me over on social media. The handle's in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. I'm at Pennell16 on Twitter and CPen16 over on IG. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that if you want access to all the sheets, projections, cheat sheet notes, Discord chat. Also cover other sports as well, including NBA, even though I don't post videos on YouTube for it. Then we have NASCAR coming up in a month, and then we have baseball coming up in a few months. So we have that to look forward to. But yeah, I think that's all I got to say. So I'll see you guys in the next one. I hope you have a fantastic start to your week.